Social Security represents one of the most successful political deceptions in American history. Politicians promise security while delivering the opposite. They claim to help the poor while systematically transferring wealth upward to middle and upper-class beneficiaries. After decades studying this system's actual effects through rigorous empirical analysis, I can demonstrate with irrefutable data that Social Security functions as a regressive tax scheme that robs working-class Americans to subsidize those who need help least. The evidence is overwhelming and mathematically undeniable. Those who can least afford it pay the highest effective rates, while those who live longest and earn most receive the greatest lifetime benefits. This isn't opinion, ideology, or political rhetoric. It's cold, hard mathematical reality hidden behind decades of emotional manipulation and statistical sleight of hand. The numbers tell a story that would shock most Americans if they understood what's really happening to their hard-earned money. Today, I'll walk you through the data that exposes this cruel hoax, explain why even well-intentioned reformers consistently miss the fundamental structural problems, and reveal how simple, proven alternatives could provide genuine retirement security while respecting individual choice and property rights. The empirical evidence will shock you, but the market-based solution will restore your faith in human ingenuity and economic freedom. This system cannot and will not survive. The only question is whether we'll replace it intelligently or let it collapse catastrophically. Chapter 1: The Mathematical Deception: How Regressive Taxation Actually Works. Let's begin with the hard numbers that politicians desperately hope you'll never examine closely or understand fully. Social Security taxes hit working Americans with a combined 12.4% rate. That's the employer and employee portions together. Though every competent economist knows the worker ultimately bears the full burden through reduced wages and compensation packages. But here's the crucial deception that makes this system particularly cruel. This heavy tax applies only to the first $160, $200 of income in 2023. Every single dollar above that threshold escapes Social Security taxation entirely, creating a massive tax shelter for high earners. Consider the stark reality facing two typical workers: Maria, earning $40,000 annually managing Gerstrand, and Robert, T executive pulling down $40,000 annually managing a restaurant, and Robert, a corporate executive pulling down $40,000 annually managing Gerstrand, and Robert, T executive pulling down $400,000 per year. Maria pays the full 12.4% rate on every dollar she earns. There's no escape, no exemptions, no clever accounting tricks available to working-class Americans. Robert pays 12.4% on only the first $160, $200 of his substantial income, meaning his effective Social Security tax rate plummets to just 4.97% of his total earnings. Maria shoulders nearly 2.5 times Robert's proportional burden, despite having vastly less disposable income and far fewer financial options. This regressive structure becomes even more perverse and morally outrageous when we examine lifetime contributions versus lifetime benefits received. Higher earners consistently live significantly longer than lower earners, a well-documented fact across every demographic study conducted over the past century. The wealthy executive who retires comfortably at 65 can realistically expect to collect benefits for nearly 2 decades or more, while the working-class laborer often dies within a decade of retirement, sometimes even before reaching retirement age. The system literally rewards longevity, which correlates directly and powerfully with income levels, education, healthcare access, and lifestyle factors. The benefit formula appears progressive on its surface, seemingly replacing a higher percentage of low earners' pre-retirement income through a complex calculation system. But this superficial progressivity completely collapses under serious actuarial analysis that considers real-world outcomes. When we calculate total lifetime benefits adjusted for actual life expectancy patterns across income groups, The wealthy consistently receive substantially higher returns on their forced investment. They pay dramatically lower effective tax rates, live much longer to collect benefits, and often qualify for spousal benefits that further enhance their total lifetime payout. Government actuaries and Social Security Administration statisticians know these damning numbers intimately but systematically bury them in dense technical reports that few journalists bother reading and even fewer politicians want to understand or discuss publicly. The system's defenders consistently point to replacement rates while deliberately ignoring total returns, life expectancy differentials, opportunity costs of forced savings, and the devastating impact on wealth accumulation for working families. Chapter 2: The Opportunity Cost Catastrophe: Calculating what workers actually lose. The true economic crime of Social Security extends far beyond its regressive taxation structure. It's the astronomical opportunity cost imposed on every single working American that represents the real tragedy. During my extensive research into investment returns, compound growth, and long-term economic development, I calculated precisely what ordinary workers could achieve if simply allowed to invest their Social Security contributions in basic index funds tracking the broader American economy. A typical worker earning $50,000 annually, contributing the current Social Security rate of $12.450,000 annually, contributing the current Social Security rate of 12.4% to a diversified stock portfolio over a standard 40-year career, would accumulate approximately $50,000 annually, contributing the current Social Security rate of $12.41.8 million by retirement age, assuming historical market returns of roughly 7% annually after adjusting for inflation. This calculation uses conservative assumptions and includes no sophisticated investment strategies, just steady contributions to broad market indices. This same worker, under the current Social Security system, can expect benefits worth approximately $400,000 in present value terms when calculated honestly. The system literally costs this typical American worker $400,000 in present value terms when calculated honestly. The system literally costs this typical American worker $400,000 in present value terms when calculated honestly. The system literally costs this typical American worker $1.4 million in retirement wealth, money that could transform not just their golden years, but their children's and grandchildren's prospects. These calculations become even more dramatic and heartbreaking for younger workers who face the system's rapidly deteriorating finances and demographic crisis. A 25-year-old entering today's workforce will likely receive benefits representing less than 75% of currently promised levels, according to the Social Security system's own trustees and their officially published reports. Meanwhile, private investment returns compound relentlessly over 4 decades, creating wealth accumulation that no government program has ever matched or could possibly match given political and demographic constraints. The system's defenders routinely argue that Social Security provides valuable insurance against market volatility and protects workers from investment risks, but this argument crumbles completely under empirical examination. Even workers who experience the absolute worst possible timing in market history, retiring during major crashes like 1929, 1974, 1987, 2000, or 2008, would still have accumulated substantially more retirement wealth through private accounts than Social Security promises or delivers. The stock market's long-term upward trajectory, driven by innovation, productivity growth, and entrepreneurial energy, overwhelms short-term volatility for any investor with a multi-decade time horizon. Consider the remarkable Chilean experience with pension privatization beginning in the early 1980s. Ordinary Chilean workers who opted out of their collapsing government system and into private accounts managed by competing pension fund administrators accumulated retirement wealth 50 to 100% higher than the old status system ever promised. These weren't wealthy speculators or sophisticated investors, these were regular working people, including many with limited formal education and very modest incomes. The empirical evidence from Chile demolishes every argument about market risk supposedly justifying continued government control over retirement savings. Perhaps most perversely of all, Social Security actively prevents the intergenerational wealth accumulation that could help working families break cycles of economic limitation. When a Social Security recipient dies, their benefits simply vanish, gone forever, providing nothing for surviving family members beyond modest survivor benefits. A private retirement account becomes a real inheritance, helping break destructive poverty cycles across generations and building family wealth that compounds over time. Chapter 3: The Ponzi Scheme Structure: Why Basic Mathematics Guarantees System Collapse. Social Security operates on the identical mathematical structure as Carlo Ponzi's infamous investment scheme. Early participants receive money extracted from later participants, with the entire system surviving only as long as new contributors exceed beneficiaries in both numbers and contribution capacity. This isn't inflammatory rhetoric or political hyperbole, it's stark actuarial reality that government trustees explicitly acknowledge in their own annual reports, though they avoid using such direct language. When Social Security launched during the New Deal era in 1935, the system collected taxes from 42 workers for every single retiree receiving benefits. This overwhelming ratio made early benefits appear almost miraculous to recipients, who received far more than they contributed. Today, that supportive ratio has collapsed catastrophically to fewer than 3 workers per retiree, and demographic trends guarantee continued deterioration with mathematical certainty. By 2034, according to the program's own trustees and their latest official projections, the trust fund will be completely exhausted, forcing either massive tax increases that would cripple working families or benefit cuts that will devastate retirees who planned their entire financial lives around current promises. The birth rate decline that began accelerating in the 1960s created this inevitable mathematical crisis that no amount of political wishful thinking can solve. Social Security requires constant population growth and expanding workforce participation to remain even marginally solvent. But American families have been having fewer children while retirees live progressively longer thanks to medical advances. This demographic inversion makes the system's eventual collapse as predictable and inevitable as compound interest or gravitational force. I witnessed identical dynamics during my comprehensive analysis of various government pension systems worldwide throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Every single pay-as-you-go retirement scheme faces these same inexorable mathematical constraints, and every one eventually confronts the identical demographic and fiscal crisis. The supposed solutions constantly proposed by politicians, raising retirement ages, increasing payroll taxes, reducing cost of living adjustments, means testing benefits, merely delay the inevitable day of reckoning while imposing ever greater hardships on both workers and retirees. Private individual accounts eliminate this demographic dependency entirely and permanently. When workers own genuine individual accounts, their retirement security depends on economic growth, productivity improvements, and investment returns, not on birth rates, immigration patterns, or the political promises of future lawmakers. Chile, Australia, and multiple other countries that moved decisively toward private systems avoided the demographic trap entirely while providing dramatically superior benefits to their citizens. The transition costs that system defenders constantly cite as prohibitive are actually nothing more than the system's massive hidden debts finally made visible and honest. Social Security has already promised benefits it mathematically cannot deliver, creating unfunded liabilities exceeding $20 trillion in present value terms according to conservative government estimates. These crushing obligations exist whether we acknowledge them honestly or continue the current political charade. Honest accounting requires recognizing these debts immediately and creating a realistic transition plan that honors existing commitments to current retirees while freeing future workers from this mathematical impossibility that grows worse every single day we delay. Chapter 4: International Evidence: How Other Countries Successfully Escaped the Demographic Trap. The theoretical arguments for privatization gain overwhelming empirical support from real-world evidence accumulated over decades of international experience. Multiple countries have successfully transitioned from failing government-controlled retirement systems to thriving private account alternatives, providing natural economic experiments that definitively test competing approaches. The results consistently and dramatically favor individual ownership and market-based solutions over government control and political promises. Chile's groundbreaking 1981 pension reform offers the most comprehensive and longest-running example of successful privatization. Chilean workers were given a clear choice between remaining in the old government system with its declining benefits and mounting fiscal problems, or redirecting their contributions to new private accounts managed by specialized pension fund administrators operating under strict regulatory oversight. Over 95% of eligible workers voluntarily chose private accounts, attracted by superior projected returns, individual ownership rights, and the security of actual assets rather than political promises. After more than 3 decades of operation, Chilean private account holders have accumulated retirement wealth averaging 50 to 100% higher than the old government system ever promised, while maintaining complete ownership and full inheritance rights. The system has survived multiple economic cycles, including serious recessions and market downturns, consistently outperforming government alternatives. Administrative costs have fallen over time through competition, while investment options have expanded to meet diverse worker preferences and risk tolerances. Australia implemented a different but equally successful approach through mandatory employer contributions to private superannuation accounts beginning in the 1980s. Australian workers own their individual accounts completely but cannot access funds until retirement age, combining the benefits of individual ownership with the discipline of forced savings. Australian retirees now enjoy among the world's highest retirement income replacement rates, with average account balances approaching $200,000 at retirement. The system operates with total administrative costs below 0.5% annually, demonstrating conclusively that private management achieves efficiency levels that government bureaucracies never match. Even partial privatization experiments in countries like the United Kingdom and Sweden have produced measurably superior outcomes for participating workers. British workers who opted into personal pension accounts during the 1980s and 1990s accumulated significantly more retirement wealth than those remaining in the government system, despite temporary implementation problems that were quickly corrected. Swedish workers now direct a meaningful portion of their contributions into private accounts that have consistently outperformed the government portion of their hybrid system over multiple market cycles. The administrative cost arguments that American opponents routinely raise against privatization completely collapse under international scrutiny and empirical examination. Chile's mature pension system operates with total costs below 1% of assets annually, while providing extensive investment choices, full individual account management, complete ownership rights, and comprehensive regulatory protection. This compares extremely favorably to Social Security's substantial hidden administrative costs and represents a dramatic improvement over the massive opportunity costs of artificially low government returns. Critics consistently point to temporary account balance volatility during market downturns as evidence against privatization, but this argument fundamentally misses the crucial point about long-term wealth accumulation. Private account balances recover from temporary declines and continue growing over time, while government promises face permanent insolvency and inevitable benefit cuts. Workers nearing retirement during market declines retain complete flexibility to delay retirement by a year or two, But workers depending entirely on Social Security face mandatory benefit cuts or crushing tax increases with no individual control whatsoever. Understanding why such economically obvious and beneficial reform consistently meets fierce political resistance requires examining the perverse incentive structures that sustain this wealth-destroying system. Politicians, bureaucrats, and organized interest groups benefit enormously from Social Security's deceptive structure and hidden wealth transfers, while the enormous costs remain carefully hidden from most voters until it becomes too late for meaningful political action. Social Security creates the perfect political weapon for incumbent politicians: immediate, highly visible benefits for current retirees funded by future obligations that won't come due until long after current lawmakers leave office. Every congressman and senator can claim credit for protecting Social Security and fighting for seniors, while systematically pushing the mounting fiscal crisis onto their successors. The system's pay-as-you-go structure ensures that current retirees depend entirely on continued political goodwill and future tax collections, creating an extremely powerful and reliable voting constituency that participates consistently in elections and violently opposes any changes that might threaten their expected benefits. The payroll tax system's deliberate complexity helps obscure the true burden from working Americans who bear the ultimate cost. Most employees see only the 6.2% Social Security deduction from their paychecks, remaining completely unaware that employers pay an additional 6.2% that directly reduces their potential wages and compensation. This hidden tax structure reduces political resistance while maximizing revenue extraction from workers who never realize they're effectively paying 12.4% of their income for negative real returns when superior private alternatives could provide dramatically better benefits. Government employees and political officials benefit from the current system in ways that private sector workers never experience. Federal, state, and local government pensions typically provide generous defined benefits that operate independently of Social Security's long-term solvency problems, while public employees enjoy job security and benefit guarantees that insulate them from economic volatility and policy changes. They suffer none of the opportunity costs imposed on private workers while wielding disproportionate political influence over policies that affect millions of other Americans. The transition cost argument provides perfect political cover for continued inaction and delay. Politicians can claim that privatization would require massive government borrowing to honor existing commitments while simultaneously funding new private accounts for younger workers. This superficially compelling argument completely ignores that these crushing financial obligations already exist in full and will require funding regardless of when reform finally occurs. Delaying transition only increases the eventual costs while denying even more workers the substantial benefits of private ownership and market returns. Organized interest groups defending the destructive status quo wield enormous and concentrated political influence that overwhelms diffuse public interest in reform. The AARP mobilizes millions of current retirees and near-retirees who understandably fear that any systemic changes might somehow threaten their expected benefits. Government employee unions consistently oppose privatization reforms that would reduce bureaucratic employment and political influence. Major financial institutions that profit handsomely from managing massive government debt oppose reforms that would significantly reduce federal borrowing requirements and bond issuance. Meanwhile, the potential beneficiaries of intelligent reform, younger workers who would gain most from private account ownership, remain largely unorganized politically and often unaware of the massive opportunity costs currently imposed on them. They don't yet fully understand the wealth destruction occurring through forced participation in the current system, while the substantial benefits of reform lie decades in the future and seem abstract compared to immediate political concerns. This fundamental political asymmetry explains why economically beneficial reforms often prove politically impossible until fiscal crisis finally forces dramatic change. Chapter 6: The Moral Case: Individual Property Rights versus Collective Control and Wealth Redistribution. Beyond the compelling economic arguments lies a fundamental moral and philosophical question that goes to the heart of what kind of society we want to live in. Do individual Americans have basic property rights to control their own retirement savings and financial planning? Or does government possess legitimate moral authority to confiscate these funds for collective redistribution according to political preferences? The empirical evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that individual ownership produces vastly superior economic outcomes for workers, but the underlying principle of individual liberty matters even more than the practical results. Social Security systematically violates the basic property rights that must underpin any genuinely free society. Government forces working Americans to surrender 12.4% of their earned income under explicit threat of criminal prosecution and imprisonment, invests these confiscated funds exclusively in low-yielding government bonds, and promises future benefits that depend entirely on political decisions by lawmakers who may not even be born yet. Workers own absolutely nothing under this system, control nothing about their financial future, and can inherit nothing from decades of forced contributions that represent the largest expense in most family budgets. This coercive system would be immediately recognized as criminal theft if practiced by any private individual or organization. If I personally forced my neighbors to surrender 12.4% of their income to me, promising to provide them retirement benefits funded by extracting money from future neighbors' contributions, I would face immediate criminal prosecution for operating a fraudulent Ponzi scheme. Government's monopoly on legal force and violence doesn't magically transform theft into legitimate public policy or moral behavior. The individual ownership alternative respects fundamental human dignity and economic freedom simultaneously while producing superior results. Workers would own their retirement accounts completely, make investment decisions suited to their personal circumstances and risk preferences, retain full inheritance rights for their families, and build genuine wealth over their working careers. Retirement security would depend on economic productivity, innovation, and personal choices rather than political promises, demographic trends, and bureaucratic management. Critics routinely argue that many ordinary workers lack sufficient financial sophistication to manage retirement accounts effectively and need government protection from their own poor decisions. This deeply paternalistic argument assumes that government bureaucrats and politicians possess superior wisdom about individual circumstances, preferences, and financial needs. The overwhelming empirical evidence contradicts this arrogant assumption entirely. Government management has consistently produced negative real returns over extended periods, while even the simplest possible index fund investment strategies have dramatically outperformed government alternatives across every time period. More fundamentally, the sophistication argument proves far too much and leads to logical contradictions that destroy democratic government itself. If ordinary workers cannot be trusted with basic retirement investment decisions affecting their own lives, why should these same people be trusted with voting decisions that affect the entire society and future generations? Democratic government necessarily assumes individual competence to make important choices about complex issues. Denying this competence in economic matters while simultaneously affirming it in political matters creates a completely incoherent philosophical framework that cannot be sustained intellectually. The current system actually reduces financial sophistication and responsibility by preventing workers from gaining direct investment experience and understanding how compound returns create wealth over time. Private accounts would create powerful incentives for financial education, personal responsibility, and long-term thinking. Workers who control their own accounts naturally develop understanding of basic economic principles, market dynamics, and wealth-building strategies that serve them well throughout their entire lives. Most importantly for human freedom and dignity, genuine respect for individual choice necessarily means accepting that some people will make mistakes and poor decisions. Freedom inherently includes the right to err and learn from consequences. a paternalistic system that removes all individual responsibility in the name of protecting people from their own decisions ultimately infantilizes the entire population and systematically destroys the character traits of independence, responsibility, and forward-thinking that enable prosperous free societies to flourish. Chapter 7: The Path Forward: Practical Steps Toward Individual Ownership and Economic Freedom. Recognizing Social Security's fundamental failures and devastating effects on American workers is considerably easier than designing politically feasible reforms that honor existing commitments while creating genuine individual ownership for future generations. However, extensive international experience with successful pension privatization and careful economic analysis point toward practical transition strategies that could work effectively in the American political and economic context. The most promising and politically realistic approach involves optional private accounts for younger workers, closely modeled after the highly successful Chilean experience. American workers under age 40 could choose between remaining in the traditional Social Security system with its declining benefits and mounting fiscal problems, or redirecting their payroll tax contributions to individually owned private accounts. This choice-based transition completely avoids forcing unwanted changes on current retirees and near retirees while allowing younger workers to benefit immediately from individual ownership, market returns, and wealth accumulation. Participating account holders would select investment options from a carefully designed menu of low-cost index funds covering domestic stocks, international equities, corporate bonds, and government securities. This structure provides adequate diversification and meaningful choice while preventing the complexity and confusion that critics legitimately fear. Administrative costs would remain extremely low through competitive bidding among qualified fund management companies, with workers able to switch between approved options annually during designated open enrollment periods. The transition would require temporary government borrowing to honor financial commitments to current retirees while simultaneously diverting payroll taxes to private accounts for younger workers. This borrowing makes visible the system's existing massive unfunded liabilities rather than creating genuinely new government obligations. The realistic alternative, maintaining the current unsustainable system indefinitely, requires even larger future tax increases or devastating benefit cuts when the trust fund inevitably exhausts within the next decade. To address legitimate concerns about market volatility affecting workers approaching retirement, private accounts could automatically shift toward increasingly conservative investments as account holders age. Workers nearing retirement would have flexible options to annuitize portions of their accumulated balances, withdraw funds gradually over extended time periods, or maintain equity exposure for continued growth. This individual flexibility dramatically surpasses the current system's complete rigidity while maintaining full individual ownership and control. Inheritance provisions would allow unused account balances to pass directly to designated beneficiaries, creating genuine intergenerational wealth accumulation that remains impossible under Social Security structure. This inheritance feature would particularly benefit minority communities and working-class families that experience lower average life expectancies and currently receive systematically poor returns from the existing redistributive system. Political feasibility requires clearly demonstrating that fundamental reform helps ordinary working Americans rather than benefiting only wealthy investors or financial institutions. Emphasizing how private accounts would particularly help young workers, minority families, women, and low-income households, groups that consistently fare poorly under the current regressive system, could build a powerful political coalition for meaningful change. Compelling international evidence from successful reforms provides devastating ammunition against entrenched defenders of the wealth-destroying status quo. The reform process must include absolutely ironclad legal protections against future political interference with individual accounts. Account ownership rights need constitutional protection to prevent future politicians from confiscating accumulated balances during fiscal crises or budget emergencies. crystal-clear legal frameworks must establish that these funds belong permanently to individual workers and their families, not to government, regardless of future political pressures or ideological changes. Implementation could begin prudently with pilot programs for newly entering workers, gradually expanding eligibility as the private system proves successful and builds public confidence. This incremental approach allows necessary course corrections while demonstrating superior results that build overwhelming support for complete transition to individual ownership and economic freedom. Conclusion. The empirical evidence is absolutely irrefutable. Social Security systematically transfers wealth from poor working families to wealthy retirees while simultaneously destroying the retirement security it dishonestly promises to provide. This fundamentally unjust system survives only through deliberate political deception and widespread economic ignorance that keeps millions of Americans trapped in poverty throughout their working lives and into their supposedly golden years. The basic mathematics of demographics guarantee complete system collapse within the current decade, yet politicians across the political spectrum continue making impossible promises of impossible benefits funded by impossible taxation levels that would destroy American competitiveness. Meanwhile, every other developed country that courageously implemented private alternatives has achieved dramatically superior outcomes for ordinary working people without exception. The choice before America isn't between perfect and imperfect systems, it's between a market-based system that actually works and creates wealth versus a government-controlled system that mathematically cannot work and destroys opportunity. Individual ownership provides genuine long-term security, respects fundamental human dignity and property rights, and creates real wealth that transforms families across generations rather than trapping them in government dependency. The transition costs are real but entirely manageable compared to current hidden obligations, while the enormous costs of continued inaction absolutely guarantee massive suffering for millions of future retirees who will face devastating benefit cuts. The time for political half-measures and bureaucratic excuses has completely passed. America desperately needs the moral courage to embrace economic freedom and individual responsibility that originally built our unprecedented prosperity.